It's simply impossible to understand Kim Jong-un and predict his actions without putting that in the context of his father and grandfather.
This is the story of three men, one family, the Kims. Between them, they have run North Korea for over 70 years, creating their own mythical legend, a communist dynasty. An entire nation lives under their control, while they hold the rest of the world to ransom.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself.
As Kim Jong-un plays his game of nuclear poker, he follows the lead of his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, and father, Kim Jong-il.
Kim Jong-il was a playboy. He was sort of erratic. Our problem was, can you trust this man?
Surrounded by enemies, a cunning dictator will stop at nothing to stay in power.
There's always some paranoia, there's always some plot going on.
While his people starve, he reaches for the nuclear button, creating a narco-state to fund his missile program and lavish lifestyle.
You cannot survive and live there unless you're Kim Jong-il.
Seen through the eyes of the regime's friends and many enemies, the Kims, one of the most notorious dynasties of modern times.
They've been smart, and they've been ruthless, and they've been single-minded on their overarching goal, which is to preserve the Kim dynasty, to keep the regime in power.
In 1988, South Korea had staged the Olympic Games, and it was a huge triumph. In 1989, North Korea staged its response. This youth festival was a classic North Korean production, and it involved not only their own people, they had the supporting cast from all their comrades in the socialist bloc. It was a way for them to try to boost the image of North Korea and to show that they had friends all over the world. So you have this really weird dynamic of this moment of great communist triumphalism presided over by Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, when the edifice underneath was so weak, and in a matter of months, it was all going to come crashing down.
Tonight, East Germany simply threw open the gates of that country, the gates which have been closed now for almost 30 years.
If you put yourself in the shoes of Kim Jong-il in the early 90s, you've got Erich Honecker from East Germany.
It happened so suddenly. The wall finally opened.
Nicolae Ceausescu from Romania. And the Soviet Union. These are all North Korea's friends, and they've all ended up in the dustbin of history, and this has to have generated considerable anxiety and unease about the ability of North Korea to stay afloat. I first went to North Korea in 1989, and that was the first of what eventually became 17 trips over almost 25 years. The way to look at North Korea is like a 15th century Korean kingdom in which you have the emperor, who is the son of heaven, and the dynasty that springs from that.
The grandfather of the dynasty, Kim Il-sung, has been North Korea's unchallenged ruler for the last 4 decades. Now, the end of the Cold War triggers the start of the handover of power to his chosen successor, his son, Kim Jong-il.
The decision to put Kim Jong-il at the head of the army immediately after the fall of the Soviet Union, to give him operational control over the most important institution in North Korea at a time when his father was almost 80, was a way to let everybody know that Kim Jong-il is the guy.
아버지하고 성품상으로 많이 차이가 납니다. 부잣집 2세, 왕자처럼 자라서 아나무인이고 자기 권력에 대한 도전, 그것을 가장 두려워한 것 같고 강박관념 같은 것이 심해서 외부의 적에 대한 두려움도 굉장히 강했고
Kim Jong-il had spent years as crown prince, waiting to inherit the kingdom. Now, as power beckons, he introduces himself to his people in an address lasting just 5 seconds.
영적 조선인민군 장병들에게 영광이시라!
It is his only speech ever to be broadcast. Now, with the fall of the Soviet Union and North Korea still officially at war with the United States, it would be down to this reclusive and untried leader to find a way to secure the future of his dynasty.
When you're inside North Korea, it is like going through the looking glass. They're the ones who feel scared, beleaguered, and threatened, and under siege.
Kim Jong-il makes a fateful choice. The one thing he knows will give his enemies pause for thought. The one thing that could guarantee his regime's survival.
We discovered through overhead photography that they were developing a complex at Yongbyon that seemed to have no purpose other than the production of plutonium. And the majority of the purpose of Yongbyon was to produce plutonium for nuclear weapons.
North Korea suddenly backed out of an agreement designed to limit the spread of nuclear weapons and put its country off limits to international inspectors. A lot of alarms, as you can imagine, went off.
To America, it looks like the actions of a war-hungry dictator. But for Kim Jong-il, there's a ruthless logic to his master plan. No one was going to threaten a North Korea in possession of nuclear weapons.
They had gotten our attention with their nuclear program. It was troubling because the more people studied the implications, the more they became concerned.
For America's newly elected president, Bill Clinton, it is now a priority to find out more about the man who might one day have his finger on the nuclear trigger.
Kim Jong-il was still the great unknown. And what we did know of him was not entirely savory. It was taken as kind of a given that they were going to find ways to push us into places we didn't want to go.
Kim Jong-il understood that their military could not stand up to the U.S. military, and therefore they believed they had to have nuclear weapons. It was clear to me that that would be catastrophic. We wanted to stop that from happening. The question was how to do that. I was prepared, given the authorization from President Clinton, to use conventional cruise missiles to destroy their nuclear facilities. That would have stopped the nuclear program cold.
We would quickly and overwhelmingly retaliate if they were to ever develop and use a nuclear weapon. It would mean the end of their country as they know it. They know that that is what we are bound to do.
Along the coast of South Korea, this war game, Team Spirit, has become an annual irritant across the DMZ and North Korea.
I believed, and President Clinton believed, that the North Koreans would probably respond with a military attack on South Korea. We're considering the possibility of hundreds of thousands of casualties.
North Korea reacts to the American threat by massing its vast army on the border with the South.
Kim Jong-il had moved tens of thousands of long-range artillery pieces up to cover the whole area, including Seoul, 30 miles from the DMZ. And so there was a never-ending tension.
The prospect of a new Korean War edges ever closer. In the South Korean capital, Seoul, the city braces itself for an imminent attack by the North as the United States moves closer to a surgical strike on Kim Jong-il's nuclear complex. Kim Jong-il had played the nuclear card and taken North Korea to the brink of a new war with America. But now his father, Kim Il-sung, still officially North Korea's supreme leader, is forced to step in and take control of the crisis.
Kim Il-sung believed he had overplayed his hand. He did not want a war with the United States. So he invited former President Carter to the North.
The communist guerrilla who had started the Korean War and called for the American imperialists to be crushed had turned elder statesman and was about to talk peace with the old enemy.
Good morning.
안녕하십니까?
환영합니다.
Welcome to
환영합니다. To be here, sir.
여기에 온 것을 대단히 감사하게 생각합니다.
This is my wife, Rosalind.
There was a kind of, wow, this is a major historical moment.
들어서 지금 우리들 사이에는 무엇이 중요한 거 아니? 믿음이 중요하다고.
What is important between us is trust, confidence in each other. That is the most important point.
Carter brokers a deal in return for American aid. North Korea promises to suspend its nuclear program.
If we meet again, and next time we'll become old friends already.
But for North Korea, the real prize is the promise of a political and economic relationship with the world's only remaining superpower. The Kim's aggressive strategy had paid off.
Kim was very affable. His interpersonal dynamic with Carter was quite warm and friendly. And so Carter was able to shift the climate away from confrontation towards negotiation. The tension that had hung over the Korean peninsula slowly seemed to be lifting. And then suddenly, out of the blue, you had this terrible shock.
전체 당원들과 인민들에게 고함. 우리의 전체 노동계급과 협동농민들, 인민군 장병들, 지식인들과 청년 학생들, 조선노동당 중앙위원회 총비서이시며 조선민주주의인민공화국 주석이신 위대한 서령 김일성 동지께서 1994년 7월 8일 2시에 역경으로 서고하셨다는 것을 가장 비통한 심정으로 온 나라 전체의 국민들에게
Kim Il-sung of North Korea has died of a heart attack. He was 82. His extravagant personality cult referred to him as the great leader. There's reported to be a frenzy of mourning tonight in the capital, Pyongyang.
With the death of Kim Il-sung of North Korea, the world's shrinking circle of socialist leaders lost its longest reigning member. He was in control of North Korea from before the Korean War, which he started in 1950, up through his meeting with former President Jimmy Carter that occurred just a couple of weeks ago.
The death of Kim Il-sung was a shock, and certainly there was some concern. The known quantity is about to be replaced by the unknown quantity.
The outside world had seen Kim Jong-il as the kind of spoiled brat son of the all-powerful dictator, surrounded by all of these rumors of how strange he was. While he had been groomed to succeed him, Kim Jong-il was deeply, deeply distressed by his father's death. North Korea's allies had all disappeared. Partly because of that, their economic system was kind of seizing up. So from the outside, the big question was, how long would he last?
An erratic regime with an untested leader is on the brink of mass starvation. Only a handful of outsiders have gotten close enough to even guess about the scope of the disaster. 2 years of floods have been followed by a summer of drought. According to one estimate, fully 5 million people face possible starvation.
Without North Korea's communist allies to bail him out, this is a crisis Kim Jong-il will have to face alone.
People are surviving on only about 12 spoons of food a day, and that is being supplemented in some cases by hand-picked grass. It's clearly a very desperate situation.
Those were 3 exceptionally challenging years in North Korea. The public distribution system, which is how most North Koreans got their food, basically collapsed. The damage was cataclysmic.
그때는 이제 90년대 그 중반 때는 시체를 이제 뭐 역전에만 아니라 길거리에서도 또 장마당 입구 아무 데서나 이제 시체를 볼 수 있거든요. 마지막에는 진짜 그렇게 누구도 알아주지 않고 이름 석자 기억도 못 되게 그렇게 죽어간 사람들 지금도 아직도 눈에 선하거든요. 길거리에서 특히 그때는 아이들하고 노인들이 진짜 많이 죽었어요. 그리고 그때는 막 서문으로도 막 사람 잡아먹는다는 소문도 그런 소문도 그때는 막 돌고 있잖아요.
More than 500,000 people are believed to have died during the famine.
What was interesting was, in spite of the intense human suffering, the political system remained intact.
Children have skin diseases, a kind of scurvy brought about by malnutrition and vitamin deficiency. But all of them, including this little girl with jaundice, have had their cheeks rouged to make them look healthier to outsiders.
Putting resources into ensuring regime survival takes priority over putting resources into feed the people. Simple as that. By the late 90s, Kim Jong-il had this daunting challenge of keeping the dynasty intact and keeping the system afloat at an exceptionally challenging time. So you had an all-pervasive security apparatus that would quash any political dissent.
Testing. My job was to interrogate the North Korean defectors and espionage agents. Hwanghae Iron Works on the West Coast. They employ tens of thousands of employees. Every day, 60 or 100 people die, starved. So the general manager, they sold steel to China to buy food, to feed the employees. And Kim Jong-il found out. Why did you do this without my permission? So they killed 8 people in front of all employees. So the first time in North Korean history, factory employees staged sitting demonstration against Kim Jong-il. Please give us food. The following morning, what happened? Kim Jong-il brought in military tanks and ran over them. After that, North Korea was shaking.
김정일과 같이 공연도 보고 밥도 먹고 그런 사이 관계였다고 할 수 있습니다. 영특하다는 말이 가능할까요? 그리고 자기를 반대하는 사람이 누군지를 금방 알아내는 동물적인 감각을 가졌다고 강박관념 같은 것이 심해서 항상 머리는 이렇게 좀 키가 작아서 그런지 모르겠는데 항상 이렇게 커머를 해서 머리카락을 좀 높이는 스위스에서 7cm 정도의 굽이 높은 구두를 신었고 그 배를 감추기 위해서 항상 점퍼를 입었습니다. 북한에서 지도자의 배가 똥똥하게 나왔다, 키가 작다 이 한마디 말만 해도 3대 가족이 수용소에 갈 수가 있습니다.
The regime keeps an iron grip over its people. There are numerous prison camps within North Korea. The prisoners are kept in brutal conditions. And in addition, some executions are carried out in full public view.
I witnessed the first public execution in my life when I was 7. The criminals or victims' immediate family and relatives had to stand at the very front line. When I see the people dying in front of me, it reminds me I shouldn't do anything against government and leadership. Otherwise, I will be killed exactly the person in front of me. That's exactly what the regime wanted.
The famine had pushed North Korea to the edge. But Kim Jong-il is determined to survive come what may, and wants the world to know it.
In Kim Il-sung Square, a signal to the United States and the rest of the world that North Korea, for all its troubles, is still a power to be reckoned with.
You know, the arduous march, as the famine was known in North Korea, was really devastating. But Kim Jong-il only knew one lifestyle. He didn't know a night without his cognac, without his caviar, without his sushi. We never saw him get thin.
Very few outsiders ever came close to the Kim's secret inner circle. But one man did gain the trust of Kim Jong-il.
Kenji Fujimoto is a man from Japan who became the chef of Kim Jong-il, the dear leader.
He spoke at length to an American writer about his experiences before returning to North Korea, where he now lives.
Sakudara, December 9, with Fujimoto-san. You know, he told me that he would oversee the perfect serving of the evening's meals. And then, once that was all finished, he would then come join in the drinking, often late. And Kim Jong-il loved to make him drink extra to catch up. So he basically just rolled with Kim Jong-il's posse.
普通だと100g一気に飲んで$100もらえるんですよ。
何を飲んで？
コニャック。
コニャック。コニャック。
Fujimoto would talk about the endless parties, but these parties were life and death. At these parties, Kim Jong-il would spontaneously marry people, he would divorce people, he would make women box one another. There were stories of sexual acts. There's a story that's confirmed about one person having to shoot another person at a party. Quickly, Fujimoto-san became the person to procure the elite goods that Kim Jong-il favored. He would get his shopping list, and he would take the jet.
Stand by, having ground, X-ray 1, ready to check, taxi to 1-2.
He would go to Iran for caviar. He would go to Prague for beer. Go to Denmark for pork. Kim Jong-il would get burger urges, and there was a McDonald's in Beijing, and the jet would be fired up for midnight runs to get Big Macs. Long trips to France to get cognac, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, so they obviously knew this was their single greatest customer on earth. And of course, Japan to the Tsukiji fish market for his sushi.
북한에서 김 부자와 관련된 모든 이야기는 다 탑세크릿입니다. 김정일 시대에 들어와서 여자가 부인 이름을 아는 사람이 없어요. 온 북한 사람들이. 여자 관계가 성혜림이 있었고 김영숙이 있었고 그리고 고영이 있었고 마지막엔 김옥이.
Kim Jong-il's wives and mistresses give him at least 5 known children, one of whom is destined to become the dynasty's next leader, Kim Jong-un.
Kim Jong-il's children were precious commodities. They had nannies, they were in protected places. From an early age, Fujimoto-san said Kim Jong-un was aggressive. There was fire in his eyes. He was competitive, and that everyone called him the little tiger. There was a time in which Fujimoto-san notices that Kim Jong-un and his older brother are attempting to make a kite work. And the kite won't fly. And there are lots of executives standing around, men in suits. None of them will help the boys with the kite. They go to assist the boys. They might be insinuating incompetence in the boys. An action like that could put you under great scrutiny. Fujimoto-san told me, he comes out and he knows what's wrong with the kite. there's no tail on it. So he puts the tail on the kite, and then the kite flies. When Kim Jong-il comes back and sees the kite flying, sees his boys happening, that has a great impression upon him. And one day, Kim Jong-il came to Fujimoto-san. He said, I've fired the nannies, and you're going to be their playmate.
North Korea's human and economic ruin leaves Kim Jong-il desperate for hard currency to prop up his ailing dynasty. And he will stop at nothing to get it.
The FBI was aware that somebody was counterfeiting our $100 bill. So I put the word out that I was looking for good quality counterfeit money. I spent 26 years in the FBI. I've successfully posed as a contract killer, as a white-collar criminal, as a pedophile, as an international arms dealer. It was a pretty exciting roller coaster career.
This money is easy money, right?
Okay.
Easy money.
This was my first meeting with Wilson Liu. I was in a hotel room. He was telling me that he was responsible for bringing in near-perfect $100 bills to the United States. And I explained I could get their container through the port.
When you got like this kind of business, if you do one time, you don't want to do the other business anymore.
Okay. It was 35 cents on a dollar, so it was $350,000 for a $1 million purchase.
Political is very...
Politics,
politics is very, very dark and dirty. I hate it.
You just don't buy a printing press off of Craigslist. We're talking about the same presses that are used by our Bureau of Engraving and Printing. We're talking about specialized paper. So all of this has to be acquired with the approval of the highest levels of government. And Wilson Liu, in conversations, said that these were the North Korean manufactured supernotes, our counterfeit $100 bill. We were told that it would be coming in a 20-foot container. The money would be stored in rolls of fabric. We keep rolling and rolling, and all of a sudden I feel lumps in the fabric. And this money, the counterfeit currency, the supernote, is all there.
North Korea also launders the supernote via sealed diplomatic bags, using Asian organized crime syndicates, as well as the banks and casinos of Macau. But that's just one part of a vast criminal operation centered on Pyongyang and spanning the entire globe.
The North Koreans got involved in all kinds of dodgy international dealings. They were selling all kinds of stuff because they desperately needed foreign currency.
North Korea also traffics narcotics. Methamphetamine and heroin have been seized as far as Germany, Russia, and Australia. All the money is channeled back into a secret fund controlled by Kim Jong-il to help pay for the one thing he hopes will guarantee his regime's survival.
Calls the firing of a ballistic missile by North Korea a, quote, serious development.
The missile test was, I think, in part a signal to the United States that if you're gonna not come through on your side, then we can continue to do things that you don't like. Just because North Korea has problems, don't anybody rush to conclude it's a weak state that you can push around. You have this sort of duality in North Korean behavior which alternates between very provocative military measures, and then steps that the North Koreans take to indicate they're not so scary and that you can deal with them.
A historic turning point on the Korean Peninsula. The leaders of North and South Korea in Pyongyang, pledging to bring the Cold War in this volatile corner of Asia to an end. The North Korean leader sought to project a new image. He even joked about his eccentric reputation overseas.
불아파 사람들이랑 자꾸 뭐라 말하면 왜 운분 생활하나? 운분 생활하는 사람이 처음 나타났다. 김 대통령이 어제서 이제 운분에서 해방됐다.
This is a guy who, before this time, almost never been heard to speak in public. And now he was both speaking and even making self-deprecating jokes. So it suggests that this is an act, in a sense. They can turn it on, they can turn it off, as and when they see fit.
김대중 대통령이 남북 정상회담을 할 때 거기에 언론계를 대표해서 내가 이제 그때 참석을 해서 김정일 위원장을 만나게 됐지요. 굶어 죽는 한이 있더라도 외부 사람들 오면은 하여튼 자기네들 할 수 있는 건 몽땅 다 갖다 놓고 하는 거야. 심지어는 곰 발바닥 요리까지도 내놔. 곰 발바닥. 어? 술도 최고의 술을 가져와요. 너무 호화로우니까. 얘기를 하면서 내 어깨를 막 툭툭 치면은 나도 막 어깨를 치고 내가 김정일 위원장한테 그런 얘기를 했어요. 미국과의 관계를 개선을 하려면 이 핵 문제라든가 미사일 문제 거기에 관심을 갖지 말아라. 김정일 위원장이 나보고 하는 얘기가 그거를 내가 쏘려고 그러는 순간에 미국이 미사일이 날라오고 미국의 핵 무기가 날라와가지고 우리 이 공화국은 지구상에서 없어질지도 모른다는 걸 내가 알고 있다. 그러나 적어도 내가 핵 문제, 핵을 연구하고 미사일을 더 발전시키고 해야 미국이 나를 상대해준다.
Kim Jong-il's strategy of engaging America works. In October 2000, Madeleine Albright arrives in Pyongyang to prepare the ground for a possible historic summit between Kim Jong-il and President Clinton. The U.S. hopes it will lead to North Korea finally abandoning its missile program.
Secretary of State Madeleine Albright is making history today, closing a diplomatic gap created by the Cold War. She's in North Korea for unprecedented talks with its leader.
Madeleine Albright had gone there to take the measure of the man. Who is Kim Jong-il, and is he somebody that we can reliably have our president sit down with? Her very visit itself was an important step towards the kind of normalization that the North Koreans seem to want.
기쁜 시간 보내셨는가?
So, do you spend the pleasant time there?
만족하십니까?
Kim Jong-il brought Albright to an elaborate performance in a stadium in Pyongyang to honor him and his Workers' Party.
And then there's the cards and all of that, and one of the cards had a missile being shot up, and Kim Jong-il turns to Madeleine Albright and said, well, this can be the last one. And yeah, I hope so.
But as time runs out on the Clinton presidency, the hoped-for peace summit between the two countries never happens. Neither side will ever know what could have been. With President Bush in the White House, 9/11 triggers a cascade of events with consequences for the entire globe.
As we gather tonight, our nation is at war,
and the civilized world faces unprecedented dangers. North Korea is a regime arming with missiles and weapons of mass destruction while starving its citizens. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil.
Bush put North Korea into the axis of evil, along with Iran and Iraq in his famous State of the Union address. So I think the North Koreans were not at all confident about the prospects for dealing with the United States.
Tonight, the world's attention is absolutely fixed on Iraq.
The U.S. gave the regime its first taste of a strategy called shock and awe.
The invasion of Iraq would have been a very unsettling development for North Korea. Saddam Hussein didn't have nuclear weapons. Look what happened to him. We are not going to let that happen to Kim Jong-il.
Till this morning, around the world, 8 countries were known to have nuclear weapons. Now we must add North Korea to that list.
Once that test had taken place, everything changed. You can't ever go back. You've done it. They'd shown the U.S., you can intimidate us. The stakes became much higher. The situation became much more dangerous. North Korea had a bomb.
I'm very much proud of our scientists and researchers who have conducted such a very, very successful nuclear underground test. Will there be any more? That will be enough. You don't think so?
A lot of these key turning points, there's a give and take. It's not Kim Jong-il rolling out of bed after a night swilling cognac with his pals saying, oh, let's just stage a nuclear test today, even though that's the comic strip caricature that a lot of people have.
They've been smart, and they've been ruthless, and they've been single-minded on their overarching goal, which is to preserve the Kim dynasty, to keep the regime in power.
The health news is not good for North Korean leader Kim Jong-il. The ailing communist leader suffered a serious setback and has been hospitalized.
He appeared looking very gaunt. He had suffered a stroke. He had a pronounced limp. It was clear that he wasn't well. And so that's when we started to see the signs that a succession campaign was underway.
The dynasty that had ruled North Korea for over 60 years was about to introduce a third generation to the people. On the balcony overlooking Kim Il-sung Square, the chosen son, Kim Jong-un.
It's been clear watching Kim Jong-un that he is a young man who has known for a long time that he had a very specific role to play.
Fujimoto-san told me DVD nights were a big thing. This particular night, Kim Jong-un is there, and he's 11, and they watch a movie called In the Line of Fire, starring Clint Eastwood. There's a scene where there are 4 Secret Service members, and they're all walking with their hands on the body of the limousine. Kim Jong-il says, "Stop, this is how you must protect me. You must have my hands here. This is how I want to be protected."
North Korean leader Kim Jong-il is dead. Kim suffered a heart attack due to the, quote,
great mental and physical strain caused by his uninterrupted building of a thriving nation.
When we saw the footage of Kim Jong-il's funeral procession down those cold, snowy streets of Pyongyang, well, there was the coffin on the top of the limousine, exactly as portrayed in The Line of Fire, with Kim Jong-un with his hand in the position that Clint Eastwood was walking in. You're talking about 3 generations of omnipotent, powerful people